been named, and this is some awesome stuff here. He's been named 50 Best Minds in Science by Discover Magazine, one of the 100 most creative people in business by Fast Company Magazine, one of the 50 most influential people in technology by SiliconValley.com. He's a recipient of many awards, one of them the MacArthur Fellowship, which is essentially like the Genius Award, if I could put it that way. And then I love this. So the work that he's doing is in an area called human computation. So we've been chatting about this already today, but it's the harnessing the combination, the combined computational power of humans and computers. And so remember we referenced crowdsourcing. Essentially, this is something that Luis really was at the foreground and starting of. Who's heard of CAPTCHA? And if you don't know what that is, oh, most of you, okay. So Luis invented that. And that's actually he also created reCAPTCHA, which is a project that channels this effort into a dual purpose. So when you're typing those in, it's actually helping transcribe books. While you're doing that little doodle, it's actually working towards something much bigger in the back end. And to date, over 400 million people have helped digitize at least one word through reCAPTCHA. Lastly, he started and founded Duolingo, which has over 300 million users worldwide, which essentially helps anyone learn a language for free. And so when we talk about crowdsourcing, we talk about creativity, innovation, it is a huge honor to have Luis with us. So why don't we welcome up Luis. I am extremely captivated by your story. There's been multiple miraculous things that have really happened throughout your story. And so what have been kind of those 2 or 3 maybe life-altering pivot moments that have happened in your life that really led you to the entrepreneurial journey that you've been on there?
I'd say probably the first one was here at Carnegie Mellon. I was a PhD student at Carnegie Mellon. I was a first-year PhD student actually across the street. And I was a first-year PhD student, and I was listening to the talk from a guy who was the chief scientist of Yahoo. Now, at the time, Yahoo was the single biggest internet company in the world. I mean, it was humongous. And this guy gave a talk, and his talk was basically 10 problems that they didn't know how to solve at Yahoo. And of course, I was a grad student, and I thought, well, maybe I can solve one of these. So I listened to the whole talk, and I went home. I thought about all the different problems, and there was one that it turned out I could actually, well, it took a few months, but I really could eventually, with the help of my PhD advisor, come up with a good solution. And the problem that they had was Yahoo offered a free email service. Nowadays, anybody can get a free email account. Back then, this was like a big deal. You get a free email account from Yahoo. The problem they had is they had people who were writing programs to obtain millions of email accounts. And the reason that people were writing these programs was because they were spammers. So if you're a spammer and you wanted to send 10 million emails a day, they had the problem that each Yahoo account only allowed you to send like 1,000 emails per day. So they needed millions of accounts from where to send spam. So that's what they were writing these programs, and they didn't know how to stop them. And after quite a bit of thinking, we came up with a solution where the idea was that to only allow humans to obtain email accounts. And in particular, it's these distorted characters. That's what's called CAPTCHAs. These distorted, very annoying characters that you have to type whenever you're getting an email account. That's there to make sure that you are a human and not a computer program that was written to obtain millions of email accounts. And the reason it works is because humans can read these very distorted characters. Computer programs can't do it as well. Nowadays, they can do it a little better, but back then, they really couldn't do it at all. So that's what gave rise to CAPTCHA, and it suddenly became used by every single company in the world. So that's probably the first one. The second one is related to CAPTCHAs also. A few years later, I was driving from DC to here, and a few years had passed. Every time I went to a party and people asked me what I did, eventually came out that I had invented these distorted characters. Everybody was always very annoyed at me, and they said, "Oh my God, I hate you." So I kept on thinking, how can I make this better? Because it seems like I'm annoying a lot of people. At the time, I did it back then, a little back of the envelope calculation, and I came up with somewhere about 200 million times a day somebody was typing a CAPTCHA. And now when I first realized that, I was pretty proud. I was, look at the impact that my research has had. But then I remembered, oh, well, everybody finds it really annoying. And it's also
200 million
200 million
people,
times a day. Each time it takes about 10 seconds to do it. And if you multiply 200 million by 10 seconds, that's 500,000 hours every day were being wasted on this. And then because of me, and I started feeling bad. So I started thinking, is there any way in which we can make good use of those 10 seconds? And that's where the crowdsourcing came up, where it was, the thing is, during those 10 seconds while somebody was typing a CAPTCHA, their brain was doing something amazing. Their brain was doing something that computers could not yet do. So it's a very valuable 10 seconds of processing time if you think about each person's brain as a computer. So I started thinking, can we get 10 seconds of useful work from everybody? And it turned out the answer was yes, and this is where I got this idea, where while people were typing a CAPTCHA, not only could we get them to authenticate that they're human, but also getting them to help us digitize a book. And let me explain how this process works. At the time, there were a few projects that were trying to digitize all of the world's books. The idea was to take all the books that were physical in libraries and putting them on the internet. Okay, that was the idea. Now, the way the process works is, you start with a book. You've seen those things, right? Like a book. So you start with one of those, and then you basically take a digital photograph of every page. The next step in the process is that the computer, so these are pictures of words. The next step in the process, the computer needs to be able to decipher what these words are. The problem is, for books that are a little older, the pages have turned yellow, the ink has faded, and maybe the picture is not very clear. The computer cannot recognize all the words. And in fact, about 30% of the words were not recognizable by a computer. But humans could recognize the majority of these words. So what the idea was to take all the words that the computer could not recognize, and whenever it couldn't recognize it, send it to a person that was trying to get an email account at Yahoo, for example, and that distorted word was that's the word that came out of a book, and we would use what they were typing to help us digitize the book, to basically tell the computer what it was. So every time that you type one of these CAPTCHAs, not only are you authenticating yourself as a human, but you're basically helping us digitize a book. And so that was that. It turned into a company, and then Google bought this company to help digitize all of their books, and so that was, I guess, the second time.
I've read to and heard from a child, like you had these moments where that entrepreneurship, those ideas, because ideas are cheap, but it's the implementation that's quite powerful. So what was it even in your childhood where maybe you had a moment where you're like, no, I can actually do this, or I need to do something?
Well, I grew up in Guatemala. That's where I grew up. It's below Mexico. Public service announcement. That is also not where they keep the prisoners. That is Guantanamo. just letting you all know. I get these questions. When I was 8 years old, this was in the 80s. I was 8 years old in the 80s. And all I wanted in life was a Nintendo. This is all I wanted in life. All my friends had a Nintendo. I didn't have a Nintendo. And I begged and begged and begged. And my mother came home one day with not a Nintendo, but a computer. And I was really pissed because I just wanted a Nintendo. She's like, well, that's what I got you. The guy said you could play games with this. That's what she said to me. And so I didn't know what to do. I was 8, and at the time, computers were much harder to use. So I had to figure out how to use it, and it took me a while. I kind of read the manual. That was not all that useful. And eventually I figured out how to actually play games on this thing. And eventually I got much better. I started kind of figuring out how to make my own games. But at some point, one of the things that I did was I realized, okay, the games that I was making, they're not very good. I wanted the games that other people were making because those were actually very good, but they were expensive because, well, they were expensive. And my mother bought me maybe 4 or 5, and after a while, it was $50 each. She's like, no, this is crazy. I will stop buying you games. So what I started basically copying games from other people who had computers, and at the time they had copy protection, but it was actually not that sophisticated, so I started figuring out how to break the copy protection from other people. And then at some point, I just started becoming kind of the hub in Guatemala City for basically pirating games. The statute of limitations has gone, so do not get me. It is over. But this is what I was doing, and I had I was not making money. The idea was anybody who had any game that I didn't have could come, and in exchange for their game, I would give them all the games that I had already copied. So that's how I got more games. And so at some point I had, I don't know, thousands of games probably.
That's awesome.
Break the law.
Well, I think the idea of crowdsourcing to this group is extremely intriguing because we are all leading ministries that create a significant amount of content and have enormous groups of volunteers at our disposal. But a lot of the struggle, and we've even noticed this over the last few days, is how do we harness those people to kind of work towards a particular goal or solution? And can you unpack a little bit more about crowdsourcing and how you've seen that used so powerfully?
Some of the things that I can say that really help, that if you I don't know how useful these things are, but I mean that have helped with us is progress bars. People love filling progress bars. This is one of the most amazing things in the world. Anybody who sees a progress bar that is like 60% full will do whatever they can to make it 100% full. So anything you do, and if you put a progress bar in there, that's a good thing. Points, people love points even if they mean nothing. So if you give people points for things, that is a good thing. I mean, by the way, I think these things work even if you're trying to do very serious things. Just putting a thing where you put points. Leaderboards also help a lot. You just make a leaderboard of people, and then suddenly people will do a ton more. So these are some general things that can help. But I mean, I wish I had a silver bullet of, usually the hardest thing about getting people to crowdsource anything is to get them to come in the first place, and then to keep them engaged. I don't have one solution that fits everybody, and if
fantastic.
I did, I'd be doing that.
That's right. Yeah, I read a book on that. Can you talk about leadership? How do you motivate your people, and along with the progress bars and things like that?
So, okay, just for a little more context, what I do now is I run this company. We have about 200 employees. It's called Duolingo. What it does, if you're not familiar with Duolingo, it is an app where you can learn languages with it. That's the idea with Duolingo. We launched about 7 years ago in 2012, and it has grown a lot. It's been very successful. We have over 300 million people learning languages on Duolingo worldwide. And there's a lot of staggering statistics. For example, there are more people learning languages on Duolingo in the United States than there are people learning languages in the whole US public school system. And we teach a number of languages. We teach, obviously we teach Spanish, we teach English, we teach German, French, all the big ones. But we also teach some smaller languages. We teach Irish, we teach Klingon. We teach High Valyrian from Game of Thrones. More people learning High Valyrian than Irish. Apologies to the world for that, I guess. I don't know. That is happening. I don't know what that article said about how I motivate people.
Well,
I work really hard, and maybe when they see me, they're like, "Oh, maybe I should work hard too."
Okay, well let's go with that one, because that's a good answer. I think too is around giving purpose, giving
Yes.
showing them the big picture.
That really matters. I mean, that is true. In the case of Duolingo, the majority of people that work for Duolingo really work because of our mission. I mean, we started with this mission, which is being able to teach languages for free. I mean, I started Duolingo because I am from Guatemala. Learning a language is one of these few things. In the United States, it's not quite the same. But if you live in a non-English speaking country, learning English can literally double your income potential. I mean, this is a thing to get you out of poverty. And now what's interesting is the majority of people that are currently learning a language, so 2/3 of the people learning a language satisfy 3 properties. First, they are learning English. Second, the reason they're learning English is to get a job or a better job. And third, they are of low socioeconomic conditions. Okay, so most people learning a language are trying to learn a language to get out of poverty. And the reason we launched Duolingo is because back then, in 2012, the most common way to learn a language, at least with software, were these programs. There's one in the United States called Rosetta Stone, but there's others that were like about $1,000. So it's this ridiculous thing that like, oh, people are using it to get out of poverty, but it costs $1,000. This makes no sense. So we decided that we were going to have a free way to learn languages, and so that's been our mission. And the people that work for Duolingo do so for the mission. We started and we hired a few people that could have gone to work for Google or Facebook, but they decided to come work for Duolingo because of the mission. And so at first, I was a big believer in the mission, but we started hiring these people that were basically zealots. And so by now, if I were to say, hey, everybody, actually, I've decided we're going to charge for this, everybody would quit. I mean, this is what would happen. So they're very motivated by this.
So I would love if you took a moment, like, where do you see this going? Like, obviously you started using crowdsourcing. This was a brand new thing. What are those technologies that we can pay attention to that you believe are going to have a pretty big impact on the world?
Some of the things that I think are changing. Obviously, phones. Everybody has a phone. This is not new, but I think we're going to start seeing a lot more things happen through the phone. I mean, I'm in the particular area where we're trying to move most education from offline to the phone. Now, that does not mean I want to get rid of schools, by no means. It just means a lot of the stuff that we want people to learn, we at least want to have the possibility for people to learn it from the phone. The reason this is good is because a large fraction of the world's population does not have access to very good education. But if you have access to a phone, maybe you have access to really good education. So I think we're going to start seeing a lot more things be done through the phone. That's kind of in the shorter term. A lot of the phone usage these days is for things that are not considered very good, like Instagram. It's not that Instagram's bad, but there's like, oh my God, I'm addicted to Instagram, and I'm not getting anything out of it. It's just I'm just looking at other people's pictures and whatever. I think there's going to be a shift from that to doing things closer to learning a language or getting better at this or getting better at, I don't know, botany or whatever. Like I think we're going to see a shift from that. And I think we're starting to see it of people who just don't want to feel that guilty from using their phone. So I think we're going to see some of that. The thing that I am concerned about is people losing their jobs to computers. That's in the longer term, but I think that will happen. I don't know. I mean, a lot of people say like, well, okay, maybe some other jobs will come in, but I don't know that. It is hard to know, but what I do know is it is likely that many jobs will that exist today will no longer exist in 10, 15 years. Because computers are getting so good at doing many things that humans were typically required to do. I know some jobs are going to go away, and a number of them are going to go away. I don't know if they'll be substituted by something else. I hope so. And if they're not, I also maybe hope that, I don't know, the government will give us like universal income or something. Something has to happen. I am particularly worried about developing countries. I come from a developing country. I don't think developed countries are going to suffer as much because I think what's going to happen is the development of AI is going to be such that, who's going to develop AI is Google and Facebook. It's big companies. They're gonna basically develop AI, but they're gonna make so much money from it, and they're gonna then pay taxes in the countries that they're based. So the countries are gonna be very rich, and then that's how the countries are gonna be able to pay for everybody to live there. That's great. But developing countries, like my own country, we're just gonna, first of all, there's a larger fraction of the population that is relying on jobs that are probably going to be substituted by computers sooner. And secondly, we're not gonna make any of that nice Google money. Or whatever the company it is. And so I think countries like mine are going to be particularly screwed, and I have no idea what to do with that.
So for example, 7 years ago, my wife and I lived in South Sudan. And at the time, 7 years ago, there was more people with cell phones than clean drinking water. Now, us as charity leaders, we hear that and we go, oh, we need more wells in South Sudan. But I think what you're trying to say too is, what about the opportunity by educating via the cell phone on how to build wells? Like, I think there's an enormous opportunity perhaps in developing countries. Do you see any of that in terms of, hey, maybe the combination of developing countries and cell phones, maybe there's an opportunity there?
Yeah, that's what I'm hoping.
Well, why don't we go to some of the questions that you guys have? What are the 10 problems Duolingo can't solve?
The main things we're working on at Duolingo are, first, we're really trying to teach you better. I mean, it is the case. We know, we measure with Duolingo how well people learn a language with Duolingo. We measure that, we know. We actually know that for beginner users, Duolingo is pretty close to, perfect in terms of efficiency. Like, there's not much faster. If you're a very beginner, starting from zero, Duolingo is really good. As in, we can get you pretty fast, about as fast as a classroom. Actually, faster than your average classroom, not as fast as the best classroom in the world, but it's faster than your average classroom. That's for beginner users. For intermediate users, we are not as good as a classroom. We want to get as good as a classroom. So it's not that problem that we can't solve. We roughly know the steps we need to take, but we're working on that, just making Duolingo as fast as a classroom. Our goal is that Duolingo is as good as a one-on-one teacher. One-on-one teacher is better than a classroom. Our goal is to be as good as a one-on-one teacher, but right now we're just trying to be as good as a classroom for advanced users. I think we can do that. I think we'll be able to do that in the next couple of years. That's a problem that we're working on. The other problem that we're always working on is the hardest thing about learning a language or learning anything by yourself is staying motivated. That's the single hardest thing about, this is the hardest thing about exercising. The hardest thing about you're kind of doing everything is staying motivated. So user motivation, so we spend a lot of effort trying to make Duolingo as habit forming as possible. So we have so that's another, I don't know if it's a problem we can't solve. It's something we're working on a lot. Yeah, those are the big things we're working on.
Someone pointed out when we were talking about the point systems, the leadership systems, you were describing gamification. Where have you seen that be successful that might be relevant to the nonprofit charitable sector?
I think almost anything you do, if you add light gamification, it becomes better in terms of getting users to do, or people, in terms of getting people to do more stuff. So I would say it's the type of thing that you should always do if you have the resources to do it. In the case of Duolingo, one of the ways, the main way in which we've gotten people to use Duolingo for longer is by adding gamification. When we first launched Duolingo 7 years ago, one of the things you measure to see how good your product is the number of people that start using it on a given day, and then the fraction of those that come back the next day. When we first launched Duolingo, 13% of the people who signed up to Duolingo came back the next day. Today, that number is about 55%. So of the people that sign up to Duolingo, 55% come back the next day. And the big change this whole time is we've just made basically a number of changes that make Duolingo more and more enjoyable through gamification, so that it just gets more habit forming.
What do you think it is that makes crowdsourcing so powerful?
There's a number of things that are really kind of unique and good about crowdsourcing. I mean, one of them is if you really get a large group of people, they have very different opinions. They have very different, as opposed to getting the problem solved by just one person, if you get a large group of people to solve it, you can hopefully get, as smart as the smartest person in that group. Hopefully. Hopefully it's not as smart as the least smart person in that group, because then that's not so good. But you have, maybe you can do that. You can possibly a lot of times get things done much cheaper if you don't make it about money. If it's just because people want to do this, whereas normally it would take you a ton of money to have to pay somebody to do it. If on the internet you find all the people who would be willing to do this for free because they're entertained or because they're somehow interested in it, you can do things for much cheaper.
How do you select which problems or opportunities that Duolingo and or yourself focus on?
I work on very few things, and we work on very few things at Duolingo. And this has been throughout my life. It's just one thing, usually at a time, just do one thing at a time. That has worked a lot better for me than working on 7 things at a time, not so well, so I just do one thing at a time. To pick what to work on, it's usually just return on investment. How much effort will it be given how much return we can get out of it, or how much of a dent we can make. For example, with Duolingo, we're starting to work on. This is nowhere near live, but we're starting to work on an app to teach literacy. So teaching how to read in your native language. So not in other languages, but in your native language. We believe, after doing quite a bit of research, we believe we can make an actual dent in worldwide literacy with not that much effort. And so that's kind of return on investment, and that's so basically that. And also the other thing is, what is Duolingo uniquely qualified to do? There's all kinds of problems that we have that I would like to solve in the world. I think global warming is a real problem, but I am not uniquely qualified to do that, so I'm not doing anything about it. But I think we at Duolingo are uniquely qualified to make an app that teaches you something. So that's why we're going to do literacy. So that's something else that goes into the...
How are you guys seeing that? What's the process you have behind the scenes on how you guys are implementing new ideas?
How does a new thing make it to the Duolingo app? The way it works is usually the idea comes from somebody. It really is throughout the organization. Sometimes it's from me, not all that often. A lot of times most of the times it's just from somebody. in the organization. They come up with an idea. Everybody in the company has 50 ideas that they have, but sometimes someone is, kind of champions their idea enough that they're like, okay, I really believe in this. I really believe in this. The first thing that happens is we ask them to write it in a one-page proposal, just like you've written this down. And then there's this thing on Duolingo that we have a few people that's called product review. They bring their idea to, a few people that do this thing called product review, and I'm part of that. There's a group of people, and we tell them what we think. We think, we've tried this before, and yeah, that was not a good idea. Or I just don't think this will work. Or yeah, I think this will work. Carry on. Take it to the next phase. The next phase is where they have to design what it looks like, and really, that's called the spec phase, where they really have to make a full spec of how it works. And the change will be exactly this. It will look like this. This is when it'll appear. This is the types of users that will see it. And then after that, they come to product review. We tell them yes or no. Then it gets implemented. It gets put into the app. And then the decision of whether to put it or not into the app is always an A/B test. It's always, we give it to a fraction of our users and we measure what it does. So if the idea was, for example, I don't know, put a leaderboard on Duolingo. This is just an example of an idea. We may say, yeah, leaderboard's a good idea. Then they come with the actual designs of what a leaderboard will look like. We say, sure, you do it, you implement it, and then we measure, are more people coming back every day? Are they doing all that stuff? And then the decision is always based on these key metrics about whether to put it in the app or not.
Well, as a last question, I just wanted to ask if you're open to answering this. So we're a group of people that believe in prayer. Actually, when you leave, we're going to be praying for the whole time we've had together and for you. And I just thought, is there anything that you're aware of going on that either in Duolingo and yourself that we could be praying for you?
People that are migrating away from my country and coming into the US, this is not good. Praying for them. I have a lot of thoughts about this, about how they get treated, and also about why they're leaving. But yeah, this is a terrible situation. Yeah.
Well, we will do that. So why don't we thank Luis so much for his time.